Hi, Daryl again. This is just a quick video. I was just thinking about what range for electric cars that people actually need. So this is what I think is going to happen. Um, Cars with about 350 kilometers of range that charge very fast is what normal people with normal budgets actually need. So these are cars that can be used to replace any ordinary car that people use for their everyday activities. So I speculate that if batteries are about 45 kilowatt hours and they can charge at about 170 kilowatt peak, then you can pick up about 250 kilometers of driving range in about 15 minutes. So most of the current cars with this sort of battery size only actually charge at about between 70 and 100 kilowatts, and then they taper down to 25 kilowatts when they get pretty full. So what this means is that a regular compact four-door car that's great for commuting but can be driven in longer trips with a short stop every couple of hours. So you can take a long trip with 3 or 4 charge stops if you need to. And this is the kind of driving that people need to just take a local holiday. So you want to go away for a weekend or something like that. You drive a few hundred Ks out of town, maybe 500 kilometers each way. And that makes those sorts of trips quite practical on a long weekend. Yeah, what the problem is with charging is that the chargers are not always in the very best places. So you can't really ever just drive till you have 1% left and then recharge it. So generally, when you're driving an electric car, the last 30 or 50 kilometers you can't actually use because there's not another charge station along the highway that you can use to just conveniently fill up when your battery is almost completely empty. So what I'm talking about here is just regular suburban commuter cars that are used for daily driving and errands. People who do long drives all the time can buy cars with huge batteries, and they will, and they'll save on petrol, but normal people mainly need cheaper commuter cars, and they'll never want to pay double the price to get a fancy car with all the bells and whistles and nice to have things, for just doing their ordinary commutes and errands and taking the kids to school and going to the shops. And people who are retired, they probably don't want to pay huge money for super long range cars that they'll only use a couple of times a year to use that long range. Sales representatives are the kinds of people that need a long-range car because they have to drive long drives all day, every day. Anyway, this is based on my experience of driving an electric car. So I've had an electric car for, I don't know, 3.5 years, something like that. And generally, I can drive sort of a maximum 150 to 170 kilometers on a single charge. But the thing is that the DC charges are generally 25 to 75 kilometers apart. And I bought my car to be able to do a commute of up to 70 kilometers each way. I did have a job for a while where I was driving 50 kilometers each way. But you know, I drive out of my commute range, you know, like 30 days a year, something like that. And I do like to take a kind of like a summer holiday where there would be a couple of weeks where I drive much longer kinds of distances, and, you know, I'd need 2 or 3 charge stops to drive 400 kilometers. The maximum I have driven is around 600 kilometers in one day, and I just did that as an experiment, and it wasn't really a fun experience in my car because I had to do so many charge stops. I did 8 charge stops to drive that distance, and no car company should build a car like this now. You know, it was fine to build cars like that 4 years ago when electric cars were still kind of experimental and not really mainstream. But if car companies build cars which have a limitation to the distance that you can drive each day due to the battery pack heating up, that I just don't think that's just not a very good product for the market. People want to have cars that, if you're doing, say you need to relocate a car between cities and you've got two people driving, you really should be able to drive for 20 hours and have two people swapping the driving and just drive and charge and drive and charge and drive and charge. You shouldn't ever be limited by heat capacity of the battery pack. In practice, I normally drive about 100 kilometers between fast chargers because you don't arrive completely empty and you don't really want to leave completely full. Because of the way that batteries charge, the middle part of the battery is the fastest to charge. So you want to arrive at the charger with maybe around 20% and then just charge it up to 80% and then go. And if you've got a car with very large batteries, like 100 kilowatt hour batteries, then the car will charge quickly right up to the last sort of 5 or 10%. But in practice, most normal people are not going to have cars with more than 50 or 60 kilowatt hours. So the last 20% of the battery is generally quite slow to fill, and it just wastes your time and money being connected to the charger and not transferring very much power. In my car, when the battery gets down to about 20%, that's about 35 kilometers. And if you're out in the country and you're not quite certain where the next charger is, you don't really want to be driving your car much below 20% and be uncertain where you're going to plug it in. So if I had this theoretical car with 350 kilometer range, then there would only be a few days per year that I would need to charge along the highway. So it would only be when I'm taking those summer road trips, generally. But also, I'd only need 1 or 2 charges in any driving day because I don't normally drive much more than ever 500 kilometres in a day. And if New Zealand is kind of interesting because although we do have motorways in cities, we don't have like dual carriage motorways or freeways between cities. So there's not many times where you won't be just driving out on a road that's just got a single lane each way. And so the driving speeds out in the country, you can't sustain high speeds for long periods of time because usually the terrain doesn't support that. If you drive on a nice flat road for a while, quite often you'll come to a mountain pass or a coastal road that's twisty and windy, and you just can't drive. You can't drive very far in one day. I mean, there's a few people who will try to drive the length of the country in one continuous trip, but it's not very it's not very simple to do that. Anyway, if you had this car with 350 kilometer range, then anyone could drive any distance in 200 kilometer hops, recharging for 15 minutes on each hop. But to do that, you'd need a network of chargers with higher speed charging and more outlets for more cars at each location. Because although you won't need to charge as often, there will be a big driving penalty if the chargers are busy. So if you get to a charger and someone else's, all the chargers are being used, then you're going to have to wait. So that's more time on top of your 15 minutes. In New Zealand, there's pretty much a 50 kilowatt charger in every town and even in some smaller villages now. And that means there's not really many locations where you need to go more than 80 kilometers to find the next charger. So if the charging company keeps adding more 300 kilowatt or even faster chargers with dual outlets or triple outlets, you can charge a bunch of cars per site. And as long as they maintain their existing 50 kilowatt chargers, then that fills in the gaps. So I think what would happen is that there'll be kind of a spacing of something like around 150 kilometers between large chargers along the major highways. So when you're driving between Auckland and Wellington, or up and down State Highway 1. So State Highway 1 runs north and south along New Zealand's length. So that's the kind of the major route that if you're driving often between two cities, you'll be driving primarily north and south. There's a few places where you'll journey east and west. And so there's a few places where you'd have some charges along the east-west roads. But often if you're driving long distance east-west, you'll cross State Highway 1 anyway, and it would make a lot of sense to put big charging stations on the junctions between north-south and east-west highways. At the current rate of charger expansion, it will be a few years before there are more 300 kilowatt chargers than 50 kilowatt chargers. I guess in New Zealand, and are electric cars good for the mainstream? Yeah, I think now. So if you're looking at buying an electric car in New Zealand now, and this is probably true in the east coast of Australia and in a few other places, UK and Europe, if you buy cars which have that sort of 300 kilometer range, then generally you won't have many problems finding charge stations along the drives that you take now. If you live in Australia way out in the country, then don't buy an electric car at the moment. I don't think that's not practical for some locations. But as long as you live in the urban coastal areas, then there's a lot of charges. And in New Zealand, just anywhere. I think in New Zealand, cars with even as low as 200 kilometer range are fairly practical for driving around. There's a couple of journeys that I still can't really take in my car because the landscape's too mountainous or windy, and the charges aren't close enough together for me to comfortably make those trips without worrying about the driving range. But there would be places where the charges are something like 120 kilometers apart, when really we need to have a few more smaller charges in between those ones as well. But the charging company has a goal of better than 80 kilometers, so shorter distance than 80 kilometers apart, which is pretty good. So practically, I think that people buying cars to replace their family car, you want to buy a car with at least 300 kilometers of range, and that sort of 320, 350 is the kind of sweet spot, I think, for New Zealand. Yeah, so my conclusion is for regular commuter cars with 350 kilometers of range, this is a sweet spot. But you'd require about a 45 kilowatt hour battery that charges very quickly, and so that's right on the limit of the current technology. Anyway, that's just the thoughts that I had in my head. A long time ago, before I bought my electric car, I was thinking that cars with around 200 kilometer range would be pretty good, but they're totally fine. And cars with shorter ranges are great for commuter cars, but when it comes to relocating the car between cities or taking a holiday road trip, you really need something with a lot more than 200 kilometers. 300 kilometers, I think, is really a minimum. 320 is better. 350 is pretty good. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and like and subscribe, and ask me questions in the comments.